Well, welcome to episode number 56 of the Oklahoma Weather Show. It has been a very, very wet last 7 to 10 days. Actually, really, last 30 days have been incredibly wet across much of the state. And here we are now, even though we are getting a little bit of rain, it looks like severe weather threat is not really there for today. So we're allowed to sit down and do this podcast, and wanted to bring with us Gary McManus, the state climatologist for Oklahoma. Gary, great to have you on. We haven't talked to you in about a year or so, and I think the last two times that we've had you on this show, we've been talking a lot about the drought and how bad it is. But all of a sudden, in the last 2 to 3 weeks, things just quickly changed. What happened? How did we go from talking about drought to now this?
Yeah, the heavens definitely opened up, and it's not something we would expect to see given what's happened over the last 4 to 5 years. We haven't had a lot of great springs in Oklahoma. Spring of 2013, April, May, that wasn't too bad. We really eliminated some drought during the spring of 2013. But, it had been just like last year. It started to get dry throughout the first 3 to 3.5 months of the year. And then, basically what we had was lots of Gulf moisture return, a nice slow-moving storm system park out to the west and send out those little impulses. And with all that moisture in place, it had a lot of rain ready to come down, and that's exactly what happened. And then, it's the same thing with what's happened during May, which is another slow-moving storm system sets out over there over the desert Southwest, Southern California, sends out those little impulses. We get rain, rain, rain. Too much rain, not enough some places, too much most places, and then we end up with one of the wettest last 30 days on record in the state of Oklahoma, but, dating back to at least 1921.
Now, I know this. Let's just jump straight to this question. I know there's not a whole lot that you can say about this, that we talked about yesterday. But tomorrow, the drought monitor is going to come out, and I think tomorrow may be the most anticipated drought monitor that many of us have probably had in our lifetime. What can you say about tomorrow's drought monitor? What's it going to look like, do you think?
Well, obviously, with all this rain, 10 to 15 inches of rain over parts of Oklahoma. And then on compounding, that's, compounding what we've had over the last 30 days, there's obviously going to be a lot of improvement in the drought monitor. We're going to see, especially parts of like central and west central Oklahoma down into the southwest. There's just going to be a remarkably nicer looking map, a lot less red and maroon, and a lot more of those lighter shades. It's not the first time over this drought that we've had market improvement. We had great improvement following the worst drought monitor map that we've had through this drought was in early October 2011. And we had a good 6 months worth of rainfall through March 2012. We had a really nice drought map. Almost all the drought was gone in the state of Oklahoma. Then it built back up again through 2012 after the spring. Then we had another little lull in the drought in the spring and early summer of 2013, and then we built back up again. So this is really, our second or third really good improvement in the map. This is just this time the map had a lot more color. In the previous couple of weeks. The other two were more of a long-term drought eradication, and this one is like bam, the drought is almost gone in some parts very quickly. And that's what some people say for Oklahoma, and sometimes it takes a flood to end a drought, and in this case, that's certainly the truth.
I went through a period where I thought the only way that we were ever going to get rid of this drought was to get something tropical, and I kept thinking, well, it's going to probably come in June or July. We're going to get a tropical storm or the remnants of a hurricane. I don't think that anymore. Not at all. I mean, I was very much surprised, even because last week. Now I knew that we were going to get a lot of rain in here. Just looking at the WPC 5 and 7 day QPF outputs that they were pushing out, but even those did not even come close to saying that we were going to get this much rain. Where are we seeing, do you think, the biggest improvements in the drought? I mean, is it the lakes? Is it the soil? Is it a mix of both? Or is it the aquifer? I mean, how is all this rain really benefiting the state?
Well, now I'm not sure about the aquifer. We don't have a way to measure that very well. But when we look at the drought monitor and the information I provide the drought monitor author each week from Oklahoma, we look at the short-term and long-term indicators. So short-term would be something like topsoil moisture down to a couple feet. How green is the vegetation across the state? A little bit of how are the crops doing? So whenever we have that, that all looks absolutely wonderful right now. And now for the long term, that's when we look at like lakes, stream flows, things like that. The lakes have started to respond. That's one thing we look at. If we get a lot of rainfall, but let's say Lake Altus, suppose they get a 4-inch rainfall down around that area, but the lake doesn't come up any at all. Well, we might show a little bit of improvement, but that also shows that the hydrologic drought has not responded, or that long-term drought. In this case, I think we've seen most lakes across western Oklahoma where they've been the worst start to respond, some dramatically, and the short-term indicators are off the charts better. Our state's never been this green probably throughout this drought. The wheat crop has rebounded. It was looking very dismal just a month ago. Now it's looking like possibly one of the better crops over the last 5 years. Now, of course, that's relatively speaking, not exactly setting the bar high there, but the wheat crop has responded. And now we're going to start looking at can we keep this going into the summer? Can we keep this going and try and prevent another relapse into drought? Because when we have these long-term droughts, even with these recoveries that, like I said, we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years, we've had a couple of really nice recoveries. It's just as we get 3 to 4 months of rain, and then we go 7 to 8 to 9 to 12 months without much rain. This is where we need the normal rainfall pattern to continue, if not above normal, and not go into another 6 to 8 month pattern.
Gary, I have a question for you. At what point are you, because obviously we've been dealing with the worst of the drought conditions in southwest Oklahoma, and I think you've been saying 4.5 years now is about how long this has been going on. Over that 4.5 years, countless inches of rain have been in the deficit. Who knows? You could probably say 40, 50 inches of rain. I'm not sure what that number is. But obviously we'll never make up that amount of deficit. You wouldn't want 40 or 50 inches of rain plus the rain you need for that year. At what point do you say the drought is over? Is it when the lake is 100% full, or where do you say? Because obviously, people in Moore right now with their floating storm shelters would say, you better not say there's a drought here. At what point would you say you're out of this drought?
Right, and that's the case with the response. You can have a lake that's down 15 feet, but if it's come up 4 to 5 feet in the last week or two in response to the rainfalls they've had, well, then that shows that the drought could be over in that area completely. Even though the lake is still below normal, the fact that it's responding to the moisture, that's the key, and that's what we go by in the drought monitor. So even though Lake Altus, Lugert, and Tom Steed, Lake Waurika, all of those are still well below normal, the fact that they're coming up in elevation, responding, we can still show drought improvement, and in some cases, like with Lake Hefner, Overholser, even those are still below normal to some degree. The drought's basically over in this area. You cannot say that there's any lingering drought impacts. Now, if those lakes weren't coming up, then you would say the hydrologic drought is not responding. That would be something where we'd say, well, we're not ready to show drought removal or even improvement. Now, Damon brought up something earlier about the aquifers. We do need to be able to monitor those aquifer levels better, and that's more of a groundwater type situation. Out far across far western Oklahoma, where they've had the big problem with the lowering groundwater levels, that's still a long-term drought impact, and that's going to take years to overcome. But at least for the time scales we're talking about, drought can be over even if there's still some of those long-term impacts showing up.
Big pet peeve of mine: people that do not turn off their sprinkler systems after a good soaking rain. Okay, hypothetically speaking here, if we were to not get a single drop of rain, for the next month to 2 months, how long will our soil hold this amount of moisture that we have in it right now?
Ooh, that's that, of course that's a tough question. I'm not a soil scientist, but I can just tell you, entering into June and July without a drop of rain, we would be quickly back into a drought situation or intensifying drought. That's just the basic physics of the situation. Lots of evaporation. All those plants that are alive now and green, desperate for water, they're going to be sucking that water out of the soil until it's dry, just like a straw. So if we didn't get rainfall, after this next rain for a couple months, we would set ourselves up for a flash drought situation, which is exactly what it sounds like. The droughts we see, sometimes they take a long time to develop. You get slow deficits building. Or what can happen during the summer months, if the rainfall goes away and the heat builds very quickly, the vegetation goes dormant very quickly. Now, while that's kind of a normal situation in Oklahoma, if it's bad enough, you can enter into a flash drought situation, which just a drought in a month or two.
Flash drought, something that I never heard of until I started reading your tickers that you send out. So, who do you think's the big winner out of at least the last 30 days of rainfall? Would it be the soil or the lakes?
I think it's kind of a hand-in-hand process. You really have to start to moisten those soils up before you can start filling those lakes up, because the soils are always going to drink first, unless you have like a 10-inch rainfall in 5 hours, which in some cases we did. But given the fact that we're starting to enter the summer months, we're a month away from our real hot season. I think it's lucky for some localities like Altus, like Duncan, for Oklahoma City even, that those lakes filled up a little bit, because we were in for a real dire situation. Tom Steed was down below 20%, and that's Altus's drinking supply. Waurika was way down. Those areas were in the worst category of water conservation that they could be in. There wasn't much area to sink farther. So, and of course Canton being worried about Oklahoma City taking their water when it starts to come up again. It's something for those folks that they like to see Hefner fill up, and Overholser, and even Stanley Draper. So maybe if their lake starts to fill up, which it has to some degree, still about 30% of normal capacity. It's better than where it was. They don't want Oklahoma City to be in another drought situation. Say, send that water down the Canadian. So sometimes drought's not, that water supply is not just impacted by a local drought. It's also drought from far away as well.
I gotta imagine that this rain that we've had lately, if anything, other than not only filling up the lakes and putting moisture back in the soils, that it has really lifted the spirits of much of the state. I mean, it's almost like this came in at the perfect time, because we were getting messages, as you mentioned, about the wheat crop earlier, about earlier in the year it didn't look all that great in parts of the state, and then the rain just came in at the right time. So one can only hope that we keep this pattern going. Maybe not nearly as much rain all at once. I'm totally fine with a half-inch of rain today, but it just seems that even probably the agriculture community is probably in a much happier mood right about now.
Oh yeah, once again they were facing a bad situation. The wheat crop was really struggling, except for a few localized areas. So this perked up the wheat crop for the most part. Now north central Oklahoma, that wheat crop up there was damaged enough to it's going to be a little bit more difficult for it to come back as well, and also out in the western panhandle. But it's not just wheat, it's also things like canola and getting the ground ready for planting cotton down in southwestern and west central Oklahoma, and it's building those pastures back up. A lot of that natural grass has died off over the last 4 to 5 years, so they have to liquidate their cattle herds that they built, those bloodlines over generations, and they had to fill up the farm ponds to have water for those cattle to drink. So it's not just wheat, it's every part of agriculture that's going to benefit. Now, what we don't want to see is this rain to continue, like this all the way past May into June, because that's what happened in 2007. and we basically ended up with almost an entire wheat crop out in the field, and they couldn't get the combines out into it, and it eventually just got diseased, and that was another bad wheat crop because of too much rainfall. So I'm not saying farmers are picky; they love rain, but they really need it to be, spaced out a little more than what we've seen lately.
What's your outlook, do you think, as we go into the next couple of weeks and months?
All right, from what I've seen now, we've talked about things like El Nino before and La Nina, and we've been talking about El Nino for more than a year now. And I've always been hesitant to talk about El Nino when we get later into the spring, because normally El Nino starts to die down as we get into the spring months. The coupling of the atmosphere to the oceanic waters down there sort of dies down. You lose a little bit of that temperature gradient. And it sort of kills the strengthening of the subtropical jet. But this case, though, I actually went and talked to some of the federal experts, some of those folks at the Climate Prediction Center that actually do the forecasting for the El Nino Southern Oscillation stuff. And they're telling me that the anomalies, the temperature anomalies down there in the Pacific, are pretty much as strong as they've ever seen them for this time of the year. And, so while normally we'd be seeing lessening impacts due to El Nino, I think this is a case where probably El Nino is, and they said, we can't specifically say that this rainfall pattern across the southern tier of the United States is due to El Nino, but it's very conspicuous that it looks a lot like that. Some of the analog years in the past, and generally for April, May, and June, it's more of a Texas thing. But they did tell me that sometimes Oklahoma does get caught up in that pattern of southern wetness during the springtime with a strong El Nino. Now, El Nino is still considered to be weak, but they're saying, at least for this time of the year, it's been strengthening actually, which is sort of unusual. So with that going on, I think for let's just say it is partially due to El Nino, which can explain about 30% of the natural variability of our precipitation patterns. If that's the case, well then May and June might end up looking like what we used to see back in the 2000s. And even last year's June and July were great drought eradicators over parts of the state. So I have high hopes that we're going to continue this wet pattern at least through the rest of the rainy season, maybe with above normal rainfall, with a little bit of help from that strengthening El Nino. And then, summer will be whatever it is in Oklahoma. It might probably be hot. Could be dry. That's certainly what you'd expect. But those prognosticators are now once again forecasting that El Nino to last throughout the summer, which won't have impact us at all. But once again strengthen during the next fall and winter, which could really turn us into another of those 1980 through 2000-ish type patterns where we had above normal rainfall throughout that whole period. And get us back out of this, 2010, 2014 type of pattern. That's, going way beyond what we can actually predict. I just have sort of high hopes that this El Nino is going to strengthen next year, give us a little bit this year to end out the spring, and take us back to the good old days of the 2000s when we had all that green on our time series maps of Oklahoma rainfall.
Can someone tell the city of Lawton that so they don't have to start their cloud seeding?
Well,
Someone had to say it right.
That's how it works. Once you spend all that money, it'll start raining.
Oh man!
You guys remember this right here? It was just one year ago, May 2014, near Guthrie. And what struck me, what was amazing, was the fact that it's May, everything's greening up. Typically, your humidity is coming back in. Yet, what was it, about 30 or 40 homes burned? I think one person was killed. What a difference a year makes.
Well, look at how even the grass, looking at your picture, I'll pull it back up here, is the grass doesn't look nearly as green. Now, I don't know what type of terrain that is, but Yeah, it's amazing. You think usually the month of May, Brad, we're supposed to be talking about severe weather season, not fire season, but this weather is tough out here, and you got to really think even from the agriculture standpoint. Your entire living is based off of what Mother Nature can provide, and there are parts of the United States where the weather is not this sensitive. But you choose to farm out in the plains. I mean, you can have a good year, you can have a really bad year.
And that's the thing about last year is that the January through May 20th of last year, I can pinpoint it down to the exact day. That's how boring I am tracking drought, because nobody else tracks drought down to the day. But up until May 20th, January 1st, May 20th, it was either the second or third driest January 1st through May 20th on record for the state of Oklahoma. And that's why that fire season lasted all the way. Normally it starts to end in late March, early April as we start to green up. It gets warmer, we get our rains. The grass goes green, the vegetation greens up. Last year, our worst fires were in May. And then just like this year, last May 20th, we had a nice big storm system come and set up across the desert southwest, pump all that moisture from the Gulf back up into Oklahoma, and then it started raining, and it basically rained from May 21st through January 31st. And, once again, we had great drought improvement during that period, but that was 2.5 months worth of rainfall, and then we had, 8 to 9 to 10 months worth of drought again, or drier than normal weather for the most part. And that's what I was talking about earlier. I hope this time around, at least I have high hopes this time, that we're not going to do that this time around. We're not going to see a good 2 months or 3 months worth of rainfall and then go right back into an 8 or 9 or 10 month long dry period. I think that we might be in a different type of long-term weather pattern where we're back into the wet type of weather pattern instead of that, fits and spurts of wetness and then a long period of dryness again.
Well, 2013 was wet, but I mean, you just couldn't get the rain out west. I mean, 2013, that was what, the second wettest for OKC, I believe.
Yeah, in Oklahoma City, and the bad thing about 2013 was the day after I think it was January 31st is when Oklahoma City brought the water down from Canton. Basically, the day after that, it started raining, and they ended up with one of their wettest years on record. And so, while the western two-thirds of the eastern two-thirds of the state got good relief during 2013, western Oklahoma really got hammered during 2013. They've really been hammered all the way since October 2010 when we sort of say this drought began. The western third of Oklahoma, especially out into the Panhandle. So while there's been several different recovery periods during that 4.5 year time span across the eastern two-thirds of the state, west Oklahoma, absolute devastation. We're not just talking about a few wheat crops. We're talking about complete loss of their cattle, liquidation of their cattle herds, loss of whatever trees were out there, loss of the natural grass, loss of the farm ponds. So this recovery right here is how this is different than those recoveries of the past, and that it's impacted almost the entire state. And so now we have Cheyenne with greener than it's been in 5 years. Altus can still use rain. The western Panhandle can still use rain. Parts of north central Oklahoma can still use some rain. But this is the best recovery I've seen throughout this 4.5 year drought period.
Well, and it's fun to look at Cheyenne because Cheyenne was that little sliver right out in western Oklahoma that you could see the drought was the lowest there.
Right.
And it was just from that. It was like 1 or 2 nights I felt like back in April where it just kept storming and storming and storming out there. Now, we talk a lot about the lakes out here, and there's a lot of sensitivity with Canton Lake and with Altus or Lake Altus Lugert. Are those lakes, especially, I would say probably at least Altus Lake, since it has been at least one point considered a dead lake. Is that no longer the case? I mean, was it a dead lake because it was only 9% full, or what exactly took it to that classification?
Just depends on the lake. Now, Altus Lugert is strictly basically an irrigation lake, so they use that to irrigate the cotton crops out that way. and they haven't been able to use that to irrigate the cotton crop for the last 4 years, I think. So I'm not sure if it'll be full enough by now to allow them to release the water once again for irrigation, but it's certainly hampered the cotton crops down in parts of Jackson County that rely on that water. Places like Tom Steed, which I think is on its way up to, I think it's over 40% of capacity now, maybe even higher than that. And you know, that watershed got so much rainfall, so they have taken a tremendous amount of pressure heading into the summer off of those lakes. You know, a dead lake can mean that the water is no longer fit to drink because it's so low and it has so much of an algae load in it, or it can be beneath the pipe that actually brings the water into the water system. All sorts of different things. It just depends on the lake. You know, even Skytook Lake has been at near record levels, low levels up there in Osage County, where you wouldn't expect it to be like that. And so all of these lakes across the state that have been low are at least recovering to some degree. Waurika I was really worried about because it was really lagging behind, but it finally started to come up as well. But again, you know, if they had not gotten those rains and seen the recovery in those lakes, and if you enter a summer season in Oklahoma with your lake down to 17% of capacity, your drinking water lake like Tom Steed for Altus, you're in big trouble. You're talking, you know, having water trucked in if it gets a normal type of summer in Oklahoma. Last summer was nice. 2013 was even nice. And, you know, that's one of the differences we've seen over the last couple of years versus 2010 through 2012 is the fact that it's been cooler than normal throughout most of that time period instead of warmer than normal. 2012 was the warmest year on record in Oklahoma, calendar year average. And so that kept the evaporation high throughout the entire year. It kept the vegetation growing much longer than normal. All that's bad for drought. 2011, don't have to remind everybody, the hottest summer ever on record for any state in the United States of America. July was the hottest month in Oklahoma, but not just Oklahoma, but the entire record of the United States based on a statewide average. So that heat, even if it's, you know, spread out over a year or it's just in that summer season, does a lot of damage to our ecosystem, and it strengthens that drought. So the 2013-14 period, when it was cooler than normal, was very, very fortunate we were very fortunate that we had that type of situation.
Yeah, really. Anyone else? Jonathan, Shelby, y'all want to add some things into here?
You know, Gary mentioned that Altus would have been trucking in water had we not got this rain, and I think that's something a lot of people don't realize is Duncan already was for their swimming pools. They were at water restrictions, and if you wanted to fill up your pool, you had to truck it in. You weren't able to fill it up. And so they've lightened their water restrictions now. They sent out those releases, I think, yesterday, but I don't know if that means they're going to be able to do the pools and things. Obviously, that's not near as important as actually having something to drink, but it's something that affects a lot of people down there.
Yeah, now you know, I would still, I painted this rosy picture of this El Nino giving us a 2000 through 2010 type of nice and green precipitation graph. I would still caution folks to, you know, keep those conservation measures in place until we actually see that this is going to be for real long term. You know, Oklahoma City's water supply, even after the rains they got in 2013, it was down to 50% capacity before all this rain hit. And, you know, people probably don't realize we have permanent mandatory water restrictions in place in Oklahoma City now with the odd even rationing system or watering system. I'm sure people, you know, like Damon said earlier, there are places that still have sprinklers going even when it's raining. You know, when people from Canton see that, they're not happy at all. Trust me, because I hear about it. I live in Oklahoma City, Moore area, and so, you know, until we know that we're out of a long-term drought situation, I would urge those municipalities and water managers to keep those restrictions in place to some degree. Now, you can lessen them some, but, you know, if we thought this drought was over in the spring of 2012, we thought this drought was over, you know, through the spring of 2013 into the summer of 2013, and it keeps coming back. So, again, I've painted a rosy picture, but I'd still urge caution on the water supply right now.
Is it you, Gary, that says every drought will come to an end, but another one is right behind it? Is that your saying?
It's not my saying, but it's certainly true. It just depends on how long you want to wait. We had drought throughout the 1950s through the mid-1970s when we were in sort of an unfavorable oceanic pattern where we had the Pacific decadal oscillation in its cold phase, the Atlantic multidecadal oscillation on the other side of the continent in its warm phase. Both of those mean dry weather for Oklahoma and the southern plains, and that's what we saw. Really, that same type of pattern come together from 2010 through 2000, most of 2013 into 14. Now we're into we're back in the warm phase of the PDO, which has switched rather abruptly, and it's been actually warmer than it's ever been in its history. And even the Atlantic multidecadal oscillation is in its cold phase, and then that's what we saw from 1980 through 2005 or so, when we had so much rainfall. When all these couple of generations of people grew up with so much abundant moisture, that's what gives me hope, is that that we might go into a little bit longer term of a wet spell. But again, it's just, how long do you want to wait? The next drought is on its way. It's just, a matter of time of when. Of course, we got to get rid of this one first, but it's on its way out for now.
For short term, Jonathan, what do you have?
Yeah, it's mute.
Hey, Jonathan, we're having a hard time hearing you. Let's see here. Let's see how well I know Jonathan. If I know Jonathan the way I think I know him, he is probably saying, let's see here. I don't even know what he would be saying. We'll get your microphone fixed. That computer, they're always messing around with that computer. We have a computer that the entire newsroom likes to come in and get on, and they're always messing around with the audio. So, Jonathan, can you at least hear us? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
If Jonathan wants to text in his answer, we could act like we're reading his mind.
Yes. Mind readers, yes. Well, this has been a great last 30 days, and especially if you live in the city, you get a different perspective of drought, whether you live in the city or whether you live out in rural land. For Oklahoma City, we see the grass is green, and we see that there's water in the Oklahoma River, and so we always just assume that the drought is just fine because there's water where it's supposed to be and the grass is green. But this rain that came in has really been a huge uplift, and just like we said before, the spirits of those that are farming in the agriculture community. So I hope that this is really the beginning of what's going to be a much better weather pattern as we go into the next couple weeks and months. We have one of our storm chasers, Moose, who is always sending us messages about what's happening with his land, and he said that he should get at least about 4 cuttings of hay this year, which is a big improvement from what he's had in the past. So, oh wait, Jonathan, I just got your text message. So, let's see what Jonathan is sitting there saying. He said, what is the correlation between a wet May for OKC and the upcoming summer? Strong correlation, hot, cool, or no bias?
There's really not much of a correlation, at least what we've looked at in the past. If some of you might remember my predecessor here, Deke Arndt, who's now the head of the climate monitoring branch there at NCDC, or NCEI, whatever they call themselves now. He did some correlation studies about how the preceding months rainfall correlates with like temperature and things like that. It's really a month, an intra-month correlation. So when you get into the warm season, if you have a wet month, you generally have a cooler month. That's what we saw last summer, of course. We had a very wet June and July. We had a very cool June and July, and even August was cool, and that helps, because the soil moisture was so. The soil moisture was recovered to some degree, so whenever the sun's energy comes down, it spends all its energy evaporating that soil moisture or being absorbed by the green plants instead of heating the ground. So that correlation is generally month by month. So if we have a wet July or a wet June, we'll probably have a cooler than normal June. If we have a wet July, we'll have a normal or cooler than normal July. It doesn't always work that way, but that's how it correlates best. So generally, to get a nice summer in Oklahoma, it needs to rain, and you need to have some decent soil moisture and some green vegetation. Otherwise, you're up, like 2011. Nobody could have predicted that 2011 was going to end up being the hottest summer on record for any state in history for the United States. Right here in Oklahoma, it just happened to be a perfect storm of building drought, no clouds whatsoever throughout the entire period, and it just all came together perfectly to give us that record summer heat. So, but even your normal Oklahoma summer can exacerbate drought conditions, and you can end up in August with what looks like a flash drought, but in reality, that's August in Oklahoma. It's something that we have to watch pretty carefully. What's normal for August in Oklahoma? What's like a building flash drought type situation?
Well, hopefully not, but yeah. Well, the next couple of weeks are going to be interesting. The next couple of months are going to be very interesting to see how this weather pattern plays out. But at least it looks like we've started a good thing. We'll have to see just how long we can keep it going. So, unless anyone else wants to add anything, I have to get ready for work. Jonathan at work already. Shelby, Brad, your day is already quickly coming to an end. Gary, we appreciate you coming in. Brad, anyone want to add one last thing or get in a last-minute plug?
I'll say something.
Sure.
I think we've gotten lucky over these last couple of weeks that we've had so many of these storm systems occur, throughout the mornings and then keep us cloudy. Otherwise, I think the severe weather outbreaks probably would have been pretty ferocious if we wouldn't have had those antecedent conditions where, the storms occur in the morning, mess up the atmosphere, and then it's cloudy and we don't have a lot of daytime heating. And we still had tornadoes. We still had huge hail, big hailstorms, and little meso spin-ups and things. But it could have been a lot worse, I think.
Yeah, and we're hoping the same thing happens for this Friday and Saturday.
Yeah.
And Sunday. It's that time of the year. So yeah, very, very good point. So, well, Gary, we appreciate talking to you. We're going to be anxious to look at the new drought monitor that's going to come out tomorrow morning. I'm probably going to keep hitting the refresh button, the refresh button, the refresh button, because I want to see what this is going to look like. But from the sounds of it, there's going to be a lot less of the hotter colors on it, which should be a pretty good thing.
Exactly.
So, all right. Well, thanks again, and we'll talk soon.